Modernisms and Methodology 7, Modernist Autobiographies. This lecture deals with 3 points. What is autobiography as a genre? How does literary modernism contribute to this genre? And examples of autobiography during the modernist period. First, some basic notions. Autobiography is a term that began to be used to describe a literary genre during the 18th century, from the Greek words auto, bios, graphein. Laura Marcus has written an excellent beginning study, Autobiography, a very short introduction, which gives more modern variants, autography, autothanography, autobiographiction, autofiction, life writing, personal writing. The latter 2 categories include autobiography, biography, letters, memoirs, and diaries. Autobiography is self-written, it's subjective, it takes a stance or a viewpoint within a given time frame. So imagine you're writing your autobiography during the first 3 months of 2019. You have the perspective of 2019. For example, you might be worried about climate change, you might be worried about certain political situations, and this 3-month period helps you think about your past and orient what you say. If you're keeping a diary, then every day has a different perspective. What you write in 2012 might be very different from the way you see the same event in 2019, say. Not all autobiographies are written by professional writers. Some people dictate their stories to others who write them down. These 2 quotations I find quite interesting. Latter 20th century literary critics point out that objective truth is not found in autobiography. But I believe that in modernism, the writers were already quite aware of that, and that is what helped them develop strategies for autobiography. William James wrote, "A man has as many social selves as there are individuals who recognize him and carry an image of him in their mind. You understand that you speak differently to different people you know. You speak differently in a social situation than you do when you're in an intimate space, for example, with the family pet." Memoirs relate to certain periods of life, and they're considered to have a more outward and social descriptive view than your more personal autobiography, where you speak about your inner feelings. Autobiography encompasses so many things. It's still the generic term. There's spiritual autobiography, considered one of the beginning aspects of the genre, say with St. Augustine's Confessions from the 4th century. But you have spiritual autobiography during modernism too, for example, with Black Elk Speaks in 1932, or these other volumes mentioned here. American autobiography is as old as the United States. Older, of course, but these examples give an idea. And African American autobiography provides testimony and resilience is expressed in such autobiography. This is an extremely short list. Doesn't properly represent British autobiography, but the point I wanted to make was Mahatma Gandhi and the Story of My Experiments with Truth, published in 1927, is a modernist autobiography. It's also a British autobiography because Gandhi was living in the British Empire. Gay and lesbian autobiography became prominent, let's say, during the modernist period. Such autobiographies were written for the first time then. So modernism contributes to blurring the borders of autobiography and fiction primarily. I think that's the most important thing that happens with autobiography during modernism. There's this healthy skepticism about what truth could be in autobiography or memoir during this time. This is also the beginning of autobiography by women about women. Oh, technically speaking, you can go further back and find autobiography by women, but modernism makes it a more common occurrence. There's experimental autobiographical writing, this turning to fiction to write autobiography, roman à clé, autobiographical fictions, portraits of artists as writers was very popular during this time, and especially the final example on this screen is quite interesting. The clever re-editing and rewriting by Kay Boyle of Robert McCalman's memoir, Being Geniuses Together. She decided to limit the time period to make McCalman's text chronological and insert her own chapters in between his, because she lived there at the same time and saw many of the same events he did, so to write her own version. So a male voice and a female voice in one autobiographical volume. Marcus's chapter 8 is particularly interesting, and this screen offers a few of her salient points. I'll let you pause and copy what you like from this. Please note the bottom entry, Dorothy Richardson's 13-volume pilgrimage as autobiographical fiction checks almost all the boxes. It's a quest sequence, a journey, a woman's Bildungsroman, and also an artist coming out, artists discovering they are an artist kind of narrative. Two examples then of modernist autobiography in a little bit more detail. E. Cummings' The Enormous Room, because it was written about Normandy, and Gertrude Stein's The Autobiography of Alice B. Toklas. So first Cummings. There he is as a young fellow. He enjoyed Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, got to see it several times as a young boy, and expressed his enjoyment this way at that age. Went to France during World War I to work with the ambulance units to help wounded soldiers with his good friend, a friend he made at the front, William Slater Brown. Brown was a committed pacifist, and it was thought that Cummings and Brown were trying to dissuade troops from fighting, and for that offense, they were both arrested and brought to La Ferté-Macé, where they were kept in a holding center in this building, which today is the town's high school. Cummings wrote about that experience and published it, and the same year it was published, these major modernist works were also published. So Cummings is situated into a modernist autobiographical memoir for the time it's published. It was introduced by his father, Edward Cummings, who had managed to get his son out of confinement, and it's written with a very matter-of-fact tone, describing what is there, using a lot of French words. Cummings was interested in learning about French culture and language, and the descriptions are precise, and the tone is upbeat. It's a new experience, something to understand, something to take in. And it's also testimony. This is the way Cummings arrives at his cell. He's going to call it an enormous room because he's free to think what he wants and he doesn't have to follow orders. And that's pretty amazing when you consider the conditions he was living in internment. And the introduction, "For this my son was dead and is alive again, he was lost and is found," a quotation from the Bible, and then the father's interpreting that, how his son was lost, officially dead because of misinformation, and his difficulties in getting him out of confinement are part of what the introduction holds with this beginning of the letter to President Woodrow Wilson to ask for help. We turn to Gertrude Stein now. Stein in her room at Rue de Fleurus with the portrait of her by Picasso above her. Of course, Stein described in other places too, by Hemingway in A Movable Feast, and also represented in the film by Woody Allen, Midnight in Paris, where she's interpreted by Marjorie Perloff, the major modernist scholar. Her autobiography is terribly original. Her choice to use her life companion, Alice B. Toklas, to talk about her is fabulous. Stein draws attention to herself, her talent, her accomplishments, by letting Alice talk about them in the third person. So Alice B. Toklas is saying in the work, "This was the year 1907. Gertrude Stein was just seeing through the press 3 Lives, which she was having privately printed, and she was deep in The Making of Americans, her 1,000-page book. Picasso had just finished his portrait of her, which nobody at the time liked except the painter and the painted, and which is now so famous. And he had just begun his strange, complicated picture of 3 women. Matisse had just finished his Bonheur de Vivre, his first big composition, which gave him the name of Fauve Oiseau. It was the moment Max Jacob has since called the heroic age of Cubism. I remember not long ago hearing Picasso and Gertrude Stein talking about various things that had happened at that time. One of them said, 'But all that could not have happened in that 1 year.' 'Oh,' said the other, 'my dear, you forget we were young then, and we did a great deal in a year.'" This is quite fun. A page earlier, Alice had mentioned that Stein was a genius, and she always recognized a genius when she saw one. And so Stein is able to give a wonderfully positive view of herself using Alice's voice. I find this poem is an excellent way to end this short description of Stein's autobiography, and we'll see more about her and others soon.